We've got to be in relationship with these emerging adults in order to be effective. But I'm not institutionally allergic. I think there's great power in us gathering in institutions, in the body of Christ specifically. So what are ways to think about reconciling our institutionally allergic emerging adults often, or ones that have been hurt or disillusioned by the church, with the church? And that's what we want to talk about today. One of the things that, I forgot my clicker. One of the things that unfortunately we see a lot is we see the church shopping phenomena a lot amongst emerging adults, which makes sense because one thing, they're highly mobile. They're taught, like I said earlier, to be sort of in tune with what is the next best thing. So you're always looking for the better church, the better experience. They're unmoored in a number of different ways because they're in educations or they're just having a hard time settling down in a number of ways. And we're in a highly consumeristic society, so it can be easy for them to fall into I can stay here for a while, but then if I'm dissatisfied in any way, what's the next thing I should go look at, or next thing that I should become a part of? So one of the reactions of the church is sometimes to act like an overindulgent parent. And here we have some overindulgent parents. You can see the kids. I don't know how well you can see that, but they're like candy galore on the floor. The parents have just been like trying to do everything to please them, to get them, focused on other things. I don't know. It looks like this kid's even sipping wine. I'm not sure what's going on there. But what are the parents doing? I mean, they're exhausted, right? So as a church, we can be like working so hard to attract emerging adults that we're not actually doing them a favor, and we're not doing the church a favor. We're not even doing ourselves a favor. So we need to think a little bit about what it means to interact with our emerging adults by thinking about not only how do we interact with them, but maybe not how do we attract them, how do we reach out to them in the midst of all this? And that's what we're going to do right now. Rick's going to come up. We're actually going to explore two different models, so to speak. Neither of them are models we're trying to say, this is the model you should use. They're just two different church kind of contexts. Like Rick comes from a very large church context that you've heard about earlier. I'm in a very small church context, and I'm going to interview one of the pastors from my church. And so we're just going to look at a couple of ways that people are struggling with. How do we look at engaging emerging adults in our two different church settings, just to get us thinking and not really to say anything about what you should do, but here's what we are doing.
Thanks. Thank you. These are some of the questions. Probably most of you have read the Google Doc, some, but I'm going to read. Here are questions that are relevant to what I'm about to do. I'm going to try to incorporate some of them, hit on them, some I won't. But someone asked the question, in my experience, millennials desire and gravitate towards structure. So what's the difference in structure, institution, authority? Great question. And identifying what is it that EAs are adverse to. How do we deconstruct some of their experiences in the church, especially wounds they've had in the past that cause them to be distrustful, et cetera? Great question. How do we find common ground between the millennials and the boomer generation so that you really have shared ministry and vision? How do you help them make meaning out of their lives in the midst of all the sociological disparities that we have, particularly in America? Does this emerging adult generation have a greater capacity to foster transformational communities because of the nature of how they do things? Is it an assumption on our part that becoming part of an organized church is necessary for an emerging adult to be discipled? Super. Is our model of one-on-one discipleship insufficient for emerging adults? And someone also questioned, is that a Western concept that's really missing the point of community? And how much of discipleship of emerging adults requires shepherds to function like social work case managers because of all that's going on there? These are just outstanding questions that I think reflect the level with which you're wrestling with this material. And I want to encourage the continuance of that and try to, as best I can in my little 15 minutes I'm about to do, show you how I wrestle with these things and try to address these, and we'll get as far into them as we can. If not, we'll just kind of, again, we'll keep the conversation going. But so let me just give you an illustration. My son-in-law came out of college and became a youth pastor at a church. And in the church, my son-in-law and my daughter were the only emerging adults in the entire church. They were the only ones. It's a very long-term established church with an enormous endowment. And by the way, one of the most dangerous things that ever happens to a church is when they have too much money. So if you got a lot of money in your church, give most of it away, because the more money you got, the more likely you are to be complacent. So this church was totally complacent. But they did figure out at some point, everybody's getting old and nobody's coming. And so they had a staff meeting to talk about, we've got to find a way to get young people to our church. And my son-in-law sitting there is the only 20-something in the entire congregation, right? And so he said, well, I have some things to share. And they said, well, we'd love to hear them. So he came into the next staff meeting, and he brought, he actually went to the senior co-pastors of the church and took a book by Patrick Lencioni, ever say it? Lencioni. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he showed the pastors, he said, honestly, anything we do to attract young adults, you're not going to keep them because the church is not the community they want to be a part of. I think we need to start here. Would you read this book? So the co-pastors read the book and they said, you're exactly right. We struggle with all these dysfunctions, but we just really don't feel called to deal with them. I just said to him, he called me back. I said, well, I guess your time's up, because that's it. And while that's an absurd extreme, it's something to really understand. This is why you hear me and I know I'm provocative, but you hear me kind of disparage programs. It's not because structures and scaffolding and programming is essentially evil or bad. It's because when you lean on these things, we're going to have a contemporary service. We're going to do this really cool thing that they're going to love. We're going to become hip and trendy, and you don't deal with your cultural issues, you're missing the point of what you're dealing with. And so I'm going to show you one journey of our church and how we work through this and how we went. We are, by any definition, attractional, right? I mean, you would say that if you came to our church, you'd say, attractional church. You can tell what's happening here, the size of it, the way it's done is a large church. So here's a kind of a recognition this is my analysis, living in the South, is over time, this is kind of how the South used to look. You had people in the church and you had a lot of unchurched people. I think this is true in other parts of America. It's just the South that's behind. And then over time, it just kind of get bigger. And it got bigger. And then it got bigger. And then what happens is, once there are so many people outside the church, you start saying, well, man, we got a real problem because we got a lot of churches that are kind of dying off. We've got to find some way to get them to come to our church. That's church thinking. How do you get them to come to our church? And so the problem is the culture kept moving farther and farther away from the church. So now the arrows got to get bigger and bigger. Hence, millions of dollars, if not billions, spent on churches to get these unchurched people to come to our church. Technology, staff, buildings, programs. Because the one thing that's true in America, in suburban America, you can buy attraction. And if you can buy attraction and you're really trying to get them, the best way to do it is to make it really big with really big stuff. Because that's how you get celebrity-focused, narcissistic consumer people to come to church. And so what happens is, and I'm in a big church, so don't hear me saying anything wrong with a big church, but if this is what you're relying on, all you're doing is buying their attendance by spending enough money on things that will cause them to come. Just not a lot of reliance on the gospel. This is extremely doable. I can give you a formula of about 8 things you need to have a church like that. And so one person was just a student, said, well, one of the things I noticed is, Rick, you're saying that the kind of the hip, trendy, bigger churches are not where the emerging adults go. And yet I look around and I'm like, all the emerging adults I know go to these kinds of churches. And your church is a big church, and you figured out by now I'm not hip and trendy, but it's a big church, and you got a lot of stuff going on, and you've got a lot of people there. And so, isn't it working? It depends on how you define success. If you define success and you keep score by the number of people who go to big churches, we're winning.
unless you care about the people who are unchurched, who are going further and further away from the church and now have increasing social, moral, cultural, and intellectual barriers to coming to church. Does that make any sense at all? Does anybody say, I see that, does that reality make sense? And we recognized this and we thought, oh my gracious, we're in danger of just doing this more and more and more and ignoring this. And I'm telling you, I'm being honest with you, I think our staff would agree, we could have coasted for a decade and nobody would have noticed. There's enough in what we do to keep ourselves growing. And the other thing about being the big church, and there's several in Knoxville because it's the South, but one of the things about being the big church on the block is all you have to do is wait for some of the little churches to implode and your attendance goes up. So do not confuse big churches on the corner with disciple-making success. Could they be? Yes, absolutely. Large, small, if it's disciple-making, but you really have to be aware of what you're doing and the fact that bringing 1,400 people into a room with a highly prepared worship and teaching experience runs the risk of lying to them about what it means to be a disciple. And if you know that, you can do what you do with integrity. If you don't know that, I think it's really dangerous since you can get confused. And so what we did is we tried to reverse the flow from our big church to look, instead of looking like this, to look like that. So we started asking ourselves the questions, how many of our people are deployed as disciple makers in their community? How many of our people are living and sharing the gospel in their lives as disciple makers outside the wall of the church? Now that required a lot of things. I'm going to talk about change tomorrow. Simple kinds of things like me saying to the congregation, I need you to not give all your money to the church. Use some of it to be in the community serving Christ. I don't want you giving all your time to the church. We all do our part. There's plenty of us. We need you to go and serve in your community. I need you to go coach. I need you to go serve. I need you to go mentor. I need you to go tutor. Do not let the church become the black hole of your spiritual energy. The church was never designed for that. Now, at first, some of the staff got a little nervous because we lost our giving for a little bit, and that is a scary kind of place to be. But then you get to talk to your church about, okay, now here's what we're a family, and here's our obligations. Let's keep our obligations because there's plenty here to go around. Let's make sure we're doing these other things. Again, this is our context. It's not everyone's context. This is how we began to approach this. We started in 2009, reversing the flow of the church. And the metaphor I used, having spent all the years I spent in Chicago, was the Chicago River, which in 1900 they reversed the flow of the Chicago River. It's considered one of the great civil public works marvels in history. And I'm telling you, if you're going to reverse the flow of the Chicago River, there's some heavy lifting. And I will tell you, our staff, that we've been in some heavy lifting. I'm looking at Brent over here, our pastor to young adults, emerging adults, and I mean, that first year was hard, wasn't it, Brent? First year on staff, I mean, the guy carried a burden to try to start reversing a flow. And here's another thing. If you're going to reverse the flow of the Chicago River, you're going to have to blow some things up. You're just going to have to blow a few things up. And blowing things up when things look like they're successful from appearances can be a hard thing to do. But to get from what we were to this, we had to make structural changes, cultural changes. I had to redefine what I was asking pastors to do. I actually had to let go of a couple of people that I loved, that I would love to be working with, who were pastors of integrity, but they couldn't do this. And if you can't do this, it doesn't work anymore. That's a hard thing to do. I had to change the way I spend my time, the way we work. I had to ask our student ministries to do some really hard self-assessment about what we're doing. Recently, last year, our high school pastor came to me and he said, Rick, one of the local high schools has asked me to be the assistant volleyball coach. Would you be okay as long as I did my work and left at 4 o'clock if I went and coached volleyball? And I said, absolutely not. It's part of your work. You're not leaving work. That is your work. Go coach volleyball. Count it against your hours at the church. Go be a part of the community. I get you in all these gyms, get you in all these places, and then you'll get the privilege I do is people stop calling you pastor and they call you coach. When they start calling you coach instead of pastor, then you can speak into their lives in ways you never could before. So go be a coach. Now, we don't abuse that. We don't say to our pastors, hey, take 60% of your time and go live in the community. That's not fair to our people. But our marriage and family pastor, we've given him 25% of his job to go build what he's doing in the community for churches who can't afford the kinds of things that we have. We have our college ministry on Monday nights to hundreds of college students. Over half of them are from the community, and a lot of them are staff people in other churches who are looking for opportunities to learn and grow and be fed. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. And ultimately, I'm convinced that our church structures and what we do have to look like that, have to live like that. Our values have to be like that. Our culture has to be that. And our leadership has to be like that. Or our people aren't going to live that way. And the fun thing is, Brent was telling me out of his, it's called a 3D group that he and his wife lead. You've got 7 dads now that are coaching baseball, right? They're involved. They're all single guys. They're all single guys that are coaching baseball now in their community. And to me, we've just hit a marker. And part of it's Brent's leadership and what it might look like to be a leader and be out in the community. But now they're out doing that. Do I need them to help with children's church, what people call Sunday school? Sure. But it's just not that much time. There's plenty of time to go do a whole bunch of other things and to think like that about your church. Paul, when he's giving his defense to King Agrippa, says, Jesus said this, Paul's reporting what Jesus said, "Rise and stand upon your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and witness to the things in which you have seen me and to those in which I will appear to you." Jesus' words to him is, I've appointed you as a servant and a witness to the things you've seen and the things you're going to experience. All of our people, we need to help all of them understand you're appointed to as a servant and witness. And we believe, at least in what we're doing, that that's the way in which we're going to actually really engage the emerging adult generation. Instead of trying to do enough things to attract them and becoming the overindulgent parent who's got to do more and more things because we sure don't want to lose these people, I'm fine if they leave, if it's for the right reason. My job is not to keep people. Our role is to disciple people. And then we have to go with whoever comes along with that. The gospel has to become more important than the preservation of your church. If you're a pastor, the gospel has to become more important than your job. And so when you talk about the authenticity and how do you heal church wounds, is when you work with emerging adults and they realize that you really aren't needing them to do something for you. You really are there to help them go do what God called and created them to do. And you really believe that and you invest in that. Paul said, Jesus went on to say, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. And then Paul said, therefore, O King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. And that is how we give a ravishing vision of God to our emerging adults, is for us to be obedient to the vision of the gospel and for it to become more important than all the other things that we do. And to create communities where our emerging adults can be a part of those communities. So I'm just going to show you kind of how this works itself out and just look at the model real quick. This is our church as it existed 5 years ago. This is Fellowship Church. This is Two Rivers Church. This is River Oaks Church. These are church plants off of Fellowship that are doing very well, and we're very thankful for those. But we changed how we did things, because what happens in these is they're pretty much dependent primarily on getting the right pastoral staff leader who will attract the people to the church, which is fine, but we started doing this. We started creating these little things, disciple-making communities. And we've learned over time that there are probably about 15 to 25 folks who gather together. And because I do agree with you, I think disciple-making needs to be in community. You do need one-on-ones to work with people and to work through things, but communities teach better than individuals. And communities force you to really be who you are, because with an individual, you can hide how you actually deal with people. When you're in a community, it's pretty obvious it comes out. And after all, the church isn't designed to make you happy, it's designed to make you holy. So chasing out the ugly parts of you is a good thing, because that's how you experience grace and redemption. So we started with that, and we started building all these communities. And as they built, we added what we called campuses. So that was our North Knox campus. We developed these communities, and when they got to a critical mass, we put a couple of folks out there to lead these communities. And then we started communities out in this area. It's called Pellissippi, and now we have a Pellissippi campus. And these are campuses that will eventually become independent churches, because I don't need adolescent children in my life the rest of my life, all right? So we're not planning them to become dependent. We're setting them free to become family members, adult family members. And they're led by pastors who we mentor, coach. A lot of the folks that are here have been interned and worked with those communities or those campuses. And then over time, we've started now creating more and more and more of these communities that start heading out. And we've hired a pastor of multiplication whose entire role is to develop, identify, and deploy leaders to be able to lead these campuses. And my instructions to him were, keep this according to the gospel, keep it according to our values, and I don't care what you do, just don't make it like the mothership. Because we're not doing these to be like the mothership. We're doing these to reach people who would not normally come to Christ, because my conviction on large churches, and one of the reasons they're large, is they're just choosing your church over another church. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently. There's nothing bad. I don't feel shame for being I don't carry a shame because I'm a lead pastor of a big church. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm also not confused. I'm not confusing that with disciple-making movement. And I'm realizing that most of the people, emerging adults, most of the people in the culture are never, ever, ever coming to that campus and walking into a room with 1,000-something people and listening to someone like, we had someone come recently who's not a believer. She came with a friend, and the friend was telling me, I was talking about the importance of generosity. And she turned to her friend and said, I want to believe him, but it looks like they spent too much money on this building to be generous. Well, I know what we're doing and I can stand with integrity, but she can't figure that out, and I understand why. I need to get her in one of these places. I don't need her here. And I think as you watch culture go, these larger churches are less and less attractive to the emerging adults for those kinds of reasons. And I get it. I totally understand that. My own kids are like that. And then eventually what we'd like to do is see ourselves be more of a disciple-making movement that spreads out through these communities. And what I tell them is, okay, that's generation one. This generation one. This is generation one. This will be generation two. These right here will be generation three. When we get out to generation four, the fun begins. Because this is where you can be innovative, creative, and agile as a community, because the people who helped start this never started over here. So it's a 4-generational vision to try to get the church to be out here, not thinking about what it means to be a church, but asking yourself the question of what it means to make disciples of emerging adults in a community, which to me is a much better question about what a church should be. Now, that's our model. It's one of the ways that you can do this. And I'll talk some more about change tomorrow. Jana's going to share with you a model that's very different and very effective and is able to maybe connect with some of the other things that we don't connect well with.
I'll be in the big one.
You want the big one?
Yeah, because I'm shorter. This is Jeff Holzclaw. Do I have the clicker? And Jeff is, really technically, he's Dr. Holzclaw. Just got that this year, right? Or was it last year? Last year. He is a bivocational co-pastor, which means that he has another job and that we have more than one pastor at our church. And you've been doing that since 2003, right?
Yes.
Excellent.
And we're on. We're good.
Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about what the Life on the Vine is like, what it's trying to accomplish?
Yeah, we say that we're trying to live in Christ with one another for God's mission in the world. That's kind of the way we regularly talk about our community. But in another sense, to kind of like make that connect to our normal lives, we say that we're trying to be the extended family of God. And so we're not a family church that's targeting families, but rather we're trying to be the extended family of God, and that includes all people, the grandparents and the little kids and the singles and the divorced and the young families and the older families. And so we're trying to create a place where everyone feels at home and has a place.
So would you say that you would even know how many emerging adults we have in our church context?
Well, we know it's kind of a fuzzy concept, but it's around like 30 to 35% roughly.
Okay, and why is it harder for you to figure that out?
Well, partly because, kind of skipping to some of the other questions, is because sometimes, as we've been talking, the emerging adults kind of have maybe a different sense of commitment than maybe especially a pastor would like people to have. And so, sometimes we talk with, some of the emerging adults that are around our community, they might show up once a month. And I'm like, like they're not very committed. But then, you talk to them and they're like, no, this is my church. I love this place, but sometimes I just can't get out of bed or whatever, right? And so our sense of commitment and who's around can be sometimes difficult to see clearly.
Okay. And so as far as co-pastor, you've been there 13 years. And by the way, this is Jeff baptizing, it's baptism service. This is the table, which is the altar in the middle of the church, and so we meet in the round, so people are gathered around all sides. And then this is a part of our recent Easter service, just to orient you to what you're looking at. No, you can look at Jeff, not the pictures. But anyway, so you've been there for 13 years.
Yes.
What kinds of changes have you seen over that time, especially working within this age group?
So I had kids before there was Facebook. I have 2 sons. And this new reality just hit me in the face one day when a good friend who's, about 8 to 10 years younger than me, had their first child, their firstborn child. And all they did was put a post on Facebook that their child was born. And then 5 days later, they're in the service, and I'm asking, did your wife have the baby? And he's like, I put it on Facebook. I was like, are you kidding? You can't do that. You can't put a birth announcement. So this is 10 years ago. But so just the sense of connection and how we connect has been so just in my face. I was connecting with, for this Easter service, I was connecting with some of the young adults, emerging adults, to be a part of the service. And, we kind of had these soft agreements, oh yeah, we're going to do it. No, we're not going to do it. And I, in my foolishness, relied on email to try to coordinate with them. And our youth minister was like, wait, you emailed them? It's like, yes, that's what we do. We email. It's like, no, did you text them? And he goes through this whole litany of how to connect with them. And so it's just, those are some of the things that I know it's like a big duh, but it's hard to kind of get out of those patterns of communication, of expectations, and what things look like.
So technology's been a part of, or the way we communicate because of technology has been a part of it.
Right. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think the sense of direction or purpose that the emerging adults are looking for has been. I think for a lot of them, it's very freeing to kind of be like, I'm still figuring out my life. I'm in my mid-20s. And so there's kind of an exciting piece to that because the future is open. But I also see it as very anxiety producing. And so I don't have specific responsibilities, but I'm responsible for my whole life. And I don't know how to get to that. And so there's this tension. And so when I'm connecting with the emerging adults in that way, it's just different. And so it's hard to know how to challenge and then not challenge appropriately in those kind of discipleship contexts.
So in order to talk about emerging adults, I actually asked Jeff to read an article. And the article that he read was written by a woman who, I think she's in her 20s, and she was curious about what is it that, she was having different experiences with the churches in her life. And she was curious about what is it that makes a church feel okay to an emerging adult to come in. So she decided, a couple of her friends, they decided that they would go out and they would, I think, was it 10 or 15 churches or something like that?
Started at 15 and ended up with 40, I think.
Yeah,
they just kept
ended
going.
Up with 40. They ended up visiting 40 different churches in mostly a Midwest, I think, area. And they wrote an article to say what kinds of things they saw in common from these various churches for that. And here they are: authenticity, clarity in the use of space, a place of respite, and intergenerational relationships where they can actually learn about Jesus. And this is again in October's Christianity Today. I think it was in the leadership section. And the name of the article is up above. So as you read through this and you looked at those qualities, and I think she has 5, and I only list 4, but As you looked at those qualities, Jeff, what can you tell us about how Life on the Vine is or isn't dealing with various things on that list?
Well, kind of jumping off what Rick was saying about his worship center and the mothership. We don't have a mothership, but I think the question of authenticity comes across like super strong. For us, as I said, we talk about ourselves as an extended family, and I partly adopt that language exactly to connect with the emerging adults and people that are outside of the church in a regular sense. And we think of our worship gathering much more as like a family party rather than like a featured performance. And so our worship gathering is people getting together who love each other, who have certain gifts and talents and abilities that bring them for the service of the community. And there's different levels of excellence of those people bringing them. And there's different things that we do together. But it's really the overall sense is, well, we're in this together. We're having a good time. We're retelling our stories. And we're trying to worship and love God. And I think that kind of lower sense of this is a performance, this has certain standards we have to meet, this has a time frame that it has to get in, under and things like that, I think really creates a situation where the emerging adults can just be like, oh, these are just normal people just giving what they have. And sometimes it's bumpy, sometimes it's awesome, sometimes people forget that they're next up, or something like that, or sometimes the person sharing goes on way too long, but that's okay because that's what happens in normal life anyways. That's what happens with a group of friends. That's what happens at your family reunion. And so for us, I think that authenticity piece is, we try to structure that into our worship gatherings. As far as...
hang on.
Oh, yes.
I think that means a great deal about what you as co-pastors also have to be willing to do up front, because I've seen Jeff make plenty of mistakes in front of our congregation and all of the co-pastors, and they just do it with an air of grace, and it's not a big deal because we're family, right?
Yes. Wait. I missed it? Okay.
You do make a few mistakes.
A few mistakes.
I even made mistakes.
And then in the clarity of space, as you saw in those pictures, we worship in the round. And in this article, they were talking about how space is really important, and how sometimes churches can be, they have multi-purpose kind of worship centers, like, in the afternoon or with youth, it's a basketball court and different types of things. And it seems that the emerging adults, they want like the space to actually say, what is this for? So are we going into a place to worship, to connect with God, to connect with something that's just totally different than the world I'm normally in? And so does your space connect with that? And I think ours does. As you said, we worship in the round. The altar is in the center. We're here to focus and learn about Christ and what he's doing, and to find the Holy Spirit at work in us. So that's the clarity of space. And then also...
You can see also there's artwork. Actually, the artwork changes behind your head, Jeff, up there.
Right.
There's artwork on the walls that also changes seasonally, so it tells something about the season of the church calendar that we're in. So yeah, there's a number of things that you try to do with that space.
And then along with the space, they were talking about finding places of rest, and how, because we're so technologically connected, our schedules are busy, we're running around, we always have phones, we're always being interrupted by texts and things. We've really tried to work in places of rest and peace, and so we have times of silence in our worship gatherings. We have times of corporate prayer where we're just hearing each other bring our burdens before God together. And then we regularly have different spiritual retreats where people can come and gather for a day and a half or a half a day and kind of just get away from things. And so we've really built in that sense of it's okay to like shut things down and just be. And then the last one is, it was kind of funny, but it was just keep it simple, give us Jesus was one of the things they found. Like, we don't need a big kind of ramp up. Like, we just want to know who Jesus is and how that works. And for us, we really believe Jesus comes in and through the relationships. And so we try to create just lots of opportunities, casual environments for people just to get to know each other, especially across generations. And so even just this Sunday, if the weather holds out, we're going to have a picnic. We regularly, at least once or sometimes twice a month in the summer, we're eating and barbecuing after the worship service just to kind of create informal opportunities for people to be with one another. And hopefully Christ comes in through those chances.
So speaking of these intergenerational relationships, do you, is there something that you do specifically to connect the older generation with the emerging adults, or are there specific opportunities or ministries that you have for emerging adults? What do you intentionally do for emerging adults, if anything?
No, we don't. We're a small church, and in one sense, that's the beauty of kind of our group, is that we don't really try to target like a ministry group. We don't really do that in any ministry group. We have certain things for youth and children and things like that, but we don't really target populations. Partly because we think that part of the growth and maturity of Christ is for all of us to be learning together, and the older people sharing their wisdom and experience, and for the younger people to be challenging the older people to keep growing in Christ, and that there's still more to be learned, and to keep these things all together. But that's not to say we don't target emerging adults. I personally do, and I know a lot of us do, but it's more on an individual sense. It's can you share your life with the emerging adults? And this kind of goes back to the authenticity pieces. We've found, especially my wife and I and the other ministers at our church, just invite people to your house. And not like for a thing, just for dinner. And maybe don't even clean your house. Like, let your kids be dirty. Because that really speaks a lot to, just to anyone, but especially, the emerging adults, to be like, hey, you're a person like I'm a person. Like, you're struggling with yelling at somebody just like I did. Like, and I think just being real with your house. And so that's how we target, this population, if we could speak that way, is just to share our lives and to be really intentional about that.
At the same time, I know that there are opportunities for emerging adults to pour into the church and to be invested in by the church. So can you talk a little bit about the College of things that happen in the summer?
Excuse me. Yes, well, before that, so we do have specific ministry opportunities, but in our congregation, we have a real high value of saying everyone's on mission, everyone has ministry, whether it's volunteering for stuff in our congregation or not. And so we have this sense that everyone's always involved in ministry, and we actually have sending services. Whenever someone is called out of our community for whatever reason, we make a big deal of it. It's not just that you're moving away, you're being sent by God to another place. And that's part of what we're going to celebrate. You've been here with us for a time, and now you're being sent out. And so that's a regular rhythm that we have. But more specifically to your question, we have what we call College of Preachers and College of Liturgists. Liturgists are those who help in our corporate worship and our prayer during the service. And so in the summer, we have these opportunities where people who are discerning ministry or discerning kind of their gifts and callings in the community go through about 3 months of kind of training and actually using their gifts in our community, like in the worship service. And so, which again is kind of a risky thing to do. But I think it really kind of builds in and shows the emerging adults that you're not just, I think, like cheap labor.
Right.
You're not just someone that's available that doesn't have more other things to do. But you're someone that we want to build into, to enrich, and to empower. And then if you're not going to stay here forever, but send you out, like that's okay. And so we.
Yeah, that's great. Sounds really good, Jeff.
Oh, sure. It always does when you're at a conference, right?
But so let me ask you, what has been frustrating about the kind of adults that you're seeing now, the emerging adults, and the way that they're relating or you're relating? You already talked about the scheduling thing a little bit.
Right, well, I can kind of go back to that. One is, and it's something I've learned, so it's partly, the emerging adults, but it's partly me too, is like this sense of like scheduling or like commitments is, I ran into this thing, about half a year ago where someone was like, you didn't announce it, so I didn't know we were going to do that thing again. And in my head, I was like, we do our Sunday morning teaching at 9 a.m. every Sunday for forever. Why do I have to tell you again that we're going to do it again, right? But there's this sense that like, well, no, that's just how I function. I just kind of need to know, like every week, are we still doing that thing? And so I get really frustrated. And so part of it is like, hey, just let's do this. But part of it is me, is like, this is just the environment of soft scheduling, of perpetually changing your schedule that I could either grumble about or I could get used to and just kind of meet them where they're at. So it's kind of partly me and partly them. And then I already mentioned it, the kind of the perceived lack of commitment is I know that's a way I've had to grow in a sense in relating to emerging adults of like, what I see as a lack of commitment doesn't necessarily mean it is a lack of commitment. It's just a different way of being around and being a part of things. So that's a way I've had to grow. So.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting when we were originally talking about this, just the insight of how it used to be when you scheduled something, you had to show up for it because you didn't have a phone to reschedule. or to change the plans or anything. And that's just a change in the way that we all communicate that makes scheduling a little bit more loosey-goosey and a little bit more shifting and changing.
Let your yes be yes and your no be no, right?
I know, right?
Just kidding.
Thank you very much for sharing with us.
Sure.
We're going to keep you up here, and then Rick, come on up and join us and facilitate some questions.
Yeah, I want to make sure I pay attention to time. Okay, so what questions you might have? Thank you, Jeff. Great stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have one more thing. I asked Jeff at the end of my time with him, if you have any lingering questions about emerging adulthood, what would they be? And I loved his answer, so I put it on a slide. You don't even have to say it.
Oh, I don't. Okay.
How can emerging adults help us better remember how to be the church? I just think that's a beautiful question. Go ahead, Rick. I'm sorry.
That's great. So mine was more of a macro in terms of like the big deal that you guys are able to share what you actually do in the middle of. So you've seen some examples of structures that are really designed recognizing disciple making emerging adults. Questions you all want to just, yes?
So this is just a quick question. You were talking a little bit earlier about what really matters is how we quantify or how we evaluate our contributions, not necessarily how many people we're making through pastors and so on. So I'm kind of curious, when you're looking at a population, which is what's happening as you've made first, second, and third generation churches, how do you evaluate discipleship and the quality of interactions that you're having with emerging adults?
That's hard. It takes a lot more time than to count the numbers of what we do. But what I would look for is, Robert Quinn says, don't ask what you're supposed to do. Don't ask what you're going to do. Ask what are you going to create. So I just look at it and say, are we creating a community which the fruit of which is increasing disciple making, and increasingly we're seeing more and more spiritual fruit of disciple making coming out of our emerging adults. Not are they coming, not are they attending, are they actually moving. We've got Jordan and Brandon, where you raise your hands real quick. Jordan's 22, Brandon's 27, and they lead worship a lot of times on our major big camps as well as the others. But we don't do that because, man, if we get young people leading worship, we'll get young people there. We do that because they're incredible worship leaders. And they have a heart for leading worship. And it's an environment now, we're raising them up, and now they're looking to see where they're going next and what they're doing. Brandon's on one of our campuses. And then Brandon is training and developing a team on his campus. He was there, how long did you lead worship once the campus started? It was first, second, or third week when you had a whole new team up? Third week, and then Adam, you've led worship there a couple of times, and Adam's not a worship intern. So the quicker we see them deployed, moving, taking ownership and disciple making and moving out in the community, that's our gauge. That's what we're doing. It's not how many campuses we have or whether or not they come. It's are we really creating an environment that's empowering and reproducing. Does that make sense? Yep. Mm-hmm.
Are you thinking of discipleship as like kind of the classic model of one person has two guys and then they split and then like a great
Multiplication.
Multiplication, yeah, I know what you're saying. Multiplication.
Is that what I'm thinking you're saying?
Me specifically or us?
You both, yeah. Like discipleship making, you keep saying that.
Disciple. What do you say? What do you
Yeah.
mean by that? Do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, sure. I actually don't like the multiplication model all that much. I think it's a little bit artificial. But I think what we're thinking about is, like, for instance, in the session where we were talking about the discernment, intentionality, and the three markers, we're thinking about how do we help create the image of Christ in each other and see people grow and do that in a life and life way. But there's not really in my head, you do it, then you do it. I mean, yeah, that's going to happen. If I create a disciple who ends up looking like Christ, they're going to go create other disciples. But the picture in my head is not the multiplication table. It's the development of these markers of maturity to become more and more like Christ.
And I would agree with that. And I'd add on the macro level, I do think about multiplication because otherwise I'm spiritually hoarding. I've got all these worship leaders, gifted disciple makers, people who can share their faith with an unbeliever. If I put them in a big pool and they just kind of sit there complacent, So it's a little bit more like pushing out of the nest than it is multiplication. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you want to speak into that at all, Jeff?
No, I think that's on a smaller scale. That's what we've done. Is we committed early on in our church's life that we were never going to build a bigger campus in any way. Once we had too many people and too many gifted leaders, we would just plant churches, and so which hurts. You know, we've sent out some of our best friends, you know, to continue the mission, and so. But that's what our commitment's been.
And so we did that in the middle of already having gotten a larger church. We committed we'll never build more worship center because we got to the place where it was crowded, and all we had to do is spend $2 million, and we could go up 20% in attendance and do what everybody does. We're just like, nope, that's not the goal. We're not trying to. Let's start moving this thing out. That's not healthy. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's awfully easy to become a pond instead of a river. And a pond, I don't know if you know much about ponds, but over time they tend to get a lot of really yucky stuff around them. And a river tends to stay a lot cleaner. Good, we've still got just a little bit more time for questions. These are great questions.
Brandon?
Yes.
For both of you all, since you all do plant, what are maybe one or two practical things that you see that show that the church that is being planted or the new place is not mimicking or attempting to be a part of the mothership? Like,
Yeah.
what are some indicators
Yeah.
that are red flags, like, oh, some things that need to be changed, or, oh, this is good, this is just something new, this is, like, we
Yeah.
can keep going in this way?
Yeah.
Good question.
I think some of our churches got to that point too quick. No, just kidding. But like a lot of them just said, oh, we don't want to do it just like Life on the Vine. We're going to rethink and think through these things, which I think was really good. But sometimes, especially with people who came that weren't a part of our congregation originally, they're like, no, we don't want to do it that way because that's the way the sending church did it. So sometimes there's almost too much of a pushback. But so we haven't had to wrestle with that too much.
One of the things that for ours is because we're still early on in what we're really doing, but we intend to keep it as a community movement, like to stay connected. And so we've been working on how do we help grow and develop our leaders within the whole of the community and work together. But we spend a lot of time praying, talking about things that we're doing, and I do a lot of celebrating of new things in new ways and keep reminding them, they don't have to do it this way. I'll say, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do this. We can help you with that. You go do something else. So a lot of it's the conversation of that.
Thank you, Jeff.